According to Bloomberg, technology focused on urban system is drawing billions of dollars every year of venture capital. Well-known examples are Uber, Airbnb, WeWork, or Delivery Hero. The leading tech sector, urban tech sector, between 2016 and 18 was mobility with a share of 46.8 billion of US dollars. So quite a lot and very interesting for startups, I would say. Followed by co-working, living applications and food delivery. My name is Alexandra Behrle and I'm from Siemens Mobility and I'm moderating this session. And now I'm really curious what Steffen will tell us from Siemens Advanta in Singapore about best practices in Asia regarding urban tech. So welcome, Steffen. I'm glad to have you virtually. How are you?
Oh, very good. It's already evening here in Singapore, after 6.
Great. So I would say then you can start with your presentation.
Good. Thank you, Alexandra. Good afternoon, everybody. Should be after 12 now in Berlin. So good afternoon from my side. My name is Steffen Endler. I'm very happy and excited to give that session here about urban tech in the workstream and share a few of the things which are going on here in our region and also share some of the examples that we do here in Singapore in that space. And with this, I would try to share my presentation with you. That's the topic, urban tech, connecting cities and the people. And maybe before I start, let me say a few words on more the private side of myself. So I'm living in Singapore since 2006. Most of my professional life, basically, I spent here in Asia. I'm married to an Asian since 2001. That I think makes me already pretty Asian, although I'm born in Saxony. Here in Singapore, I've been blessed that in 2 occasions I have been invited or appointed to be a member of the nation's master planning processes when it comes to digitalization. One was in 2017, where the Minister of Communication and Information appointed me into a working committee for the Singapore Infocom Media Master Plan. So I could witness firsthand how the country actually looks at their topic, their digital agenda on a national level. And the other occasion was a bit earlier, 2010, where I was blessed and invited to lend some conceptual support for the Economic Strategy Committee. That's an exercise the Singapore government does every 5 years, where they restructure and relook at what are topics in the economy that they want to push going into the future. So, and with that, I have quite a good understanding how the country works, how topics are being addressed, and can give also a bit of background of why specifically Singapore has the status reached that it has today. And that brings us to the first topic. So recently, IMD Lausanne ranked Singapore as the world's smartest city. Probably there are some other surveys who come to a similar conclusion. The question is, why is that so? And I think there is, as with every good story, not one single explanation, but it's a combination of success factors which are very well working together. So one topic which is really specific about Singapore is the view and the way how planning is being done. Now, if you imagine Singapore as a country which is an island nation, you drive from the east to the west in less than 1 hour. From the north to the south, you maybe need 40 minutes on a car. Land is actually the most precious resource of the whole country, because there is nothing that they can add to that, right? So that means everything they do with land is something which they have to think 3 or 4 times, because once you use land for one purpose, you can't use it for something else. And that by itself has forced Singapore very early on to look at things very comprehensively from different angles, weigh options, and also drive sustainability, because there is definitely no space to waste in Singapore. So that is one of the key things which because of being an island nation, makes Singapore quite specific. But what it means in terms of the bureaucracy and the government is that the planning institution, the planning authority is extremely powerful. And they run long-term plans for the whole island with a horizon of 50 years. And they update this plan every 5 years. And that already, of course, leads to the fact that Singapore by itself is by nature very, very well planned. And that's one of the key things of a good city. If a city is not well planned, it cannot be a good city. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that in terms of governance and societal will, there's a lot of coherence, and you have really very solid governance. Despite the fact that the ruling party is in power since the beginning, the founding, Singapore is also ranked as one of the best countries when it comes to zero corruption and transparency. So, and that's very much related also to the really outstanding ethics and the talent that you will find here in the public servants. And with everything, when you have good people which are aligned and motivated by good things, the outcome typically is quite good. And the other topic is that being in Asia, being Singaporean, people are very pragmatic. So there is a lot of common sense that rules that people look for the things which are doable, things which are pragmatic that can be done. And that's one of the key points when decisions are being taken. And I think that's also specifically in an urban context something important, that people look at this and see how can we get things done. And it also means that they look at urban tech not from a technology perspective, but they very much always look from a solution perspective. And as you know, a solution is much more than technology. It's the way of how you apply it, the way of how you integrate it, how it fits into the social fabric and the procedural fabric. So all the key test beds or solutions, urban solutions, which are being driven here in Singapore, they always take this solution approach. They not necessarily always have the best technology at all. And there are a lot of areas where other countries are way more advanced in the way of how the technology is being developed or being used, invented. But Singapore is very good in compensating that with the other 4 areas to a large extent. And I think that is what makes the country so specific. And that is, I think, the set of reasons which eventually leads to making that country into one of the smartest cities that we have currently on the planet. Going now a bit further, so that is an example just to illustrate a little bit to you what I was talking about. So the Smart Nations Office belongs to the Prime Minister's office. So the whole concept, the whole initiative is basically really driven from the top by the Prime Minister. And they organized the areas of digitalization for the country in 3 big groups. It's on the one hand, what are things which can make life for Singaporeans, for the people living here better? And that also has much to do with finding your way, how you interact with the different agencies, with the bureaucracy, how to make this easier, how to make this more intuitive, how to bring down transaction costs. And in the same way, what you see here is for a few examples on the red bullets is how can it become more easy for businesses to interact with the country, with the nation, but also among each other. And just to show a few examples. So they have digitalized their whole permits process. So if you want to start a business in Singapore, you log onto one website, you select what type of business you want to do. It automatically, depending on the type you select, brings you to the agencies that have a saying in the permits. You do this all in one go. And at the end, it compiles the different permits back to your whole overall application. So you really see what is required from you. And then with that integration, they also bring down the processing time tremendously down to most of the time it's done within an hour. A bit more complex businesses maybe takes a week, but otherwise it's very, very fast. And last but not least, also things which help the people. And one of my favorites here on this slide, I don't know whether you are able to see it, is that they actually have an app developed which helps. It's called Dementia Friends, and with that app, they managed to find 40 missing seniors this year, and helping them. It's quite cute, I think. A bit more specific things that everybody actually uses here in the country is ThinkPass. So everybody who works here, who's born here, gets one number. That number never changes through your lifetime. With that number, you log into your pension account. That number is the number printed on your ID card. That is the number for your social security and so on. And in last year, the government drove an initiative together with the banking sector, for example, that your virtual ID that you actually have with the government can also, in a very well-regulated manner, be used by banks in terms, for example, for credit approval and other things. So that, again, drives convenience and brings down transaction costs, not only for citizens, but also for businesses. And if you look at this overall, basically, they really structured their initiatives towards how can we make things easier for people to interact with the administration? How can we make the administration more effective in sharing data, bringing things together, integrating that towards our stakeholders that basically use those services of the administration, and what can we do to facilitate also the economy in case where certain things are still dysfunctional. And that means they really have a good digital strategy for their program, and they have the political will and the stamina to put that forward. And I think it's just some examples. And well, since I was part of that master planning exercise for the Infocom ministry, so that is basically a master plan which lays out the path for the next 10 years. It defines what key topics in terms of economical areas which will be becoming important for the country. It defines what kind of capabilities will be required. It went all the way down to saying we need to establish 3 more study courses for certain areas. Otherwise, in 5 years, we will not have enough students who can churn out the competencies that we will need in the future in the country in those sectors. So it's very well thought through and always very comprehensive. And I think this is what it makes it so powerful and also pretty successful. Now, going a bit forward, if you look into the startup ecosystem in Singapore, well, basically, Singapore, I think, is ranked since 10 or 12 years, one of the places by the World Bank as the easiest place to do business. So that means also for a startup, it's very easy to start a business here. Now, having it easy to start a business or run a business doesn't mean that it's easy to get business. And I think that's one of those things one really need to also take into consideration. Because it's so easy to everybody to set shop up here, you also basically have everybody here. So Singapore is one of the most competitive places on the planet, I think. You have all the Europeans here, you have all the Japanese here, you have all the Chinese now here, and more of them coming. You have all the Koreans here, you have the Americans here, the Australian here. So everybody plays here, and that means it's extremely competitive, and very often price level in Singapore are actually lower than price levels that you would find in some of the neighboring countries. So there's a lot of stuff that is there. There's a very well-grown ecosystem, also in terms of not only venture capital, but also the way of all the other topics that a startup appreciates to have. Government has set up sandboxed areas in certain industry to try out new business models. There's a lot of funding from the government also flowing into the startup scene with specific programs. So there's a lot of stuff going on. Sometimes I feel even it's maybe sometimes a bit too much, but when we look at what are the areas where we really see a very strong drive from startups. And I think that really centers around 3 areas. One is fintech, quite natural, Singapore being one of the global financial centers. So, of course, that's quite obvious. The next topic is mobility. which is quite a bit interesting maybe. You think Singapore has such a good infrastructure, why mobility? Well, it's mission critical for the country. The way of how mobility transportation is being addressed, not on the logistics side in terms of how Singapore can connect with its neighbor, but also on the island, that's mission critical. So, and that's why where the government also is acting as one of the most innovative and demanding customers for innovative mobility solutions. So there's a lot of things that we see, because if you have 5.5 million people living in a space which is basically equal to the size of Berlin, so it's quite a crowded place. Now let's imagine that on that space you have 5 airports. 20% of the whole space is occupied by the military, because it's a country, not only city Singapore. So then you can imagine how dense it is and how space matters, and how getting people and things from A to B is really driving connectivity and productivity. That's something which matters, and there's a lot of things going on here. And I will relate to that a bit later in my speech. And the last topic is around retailing logistics, where we see a few very successful startups like Lazada, for example, which actually Germans who founded it, but it was headquartered here in Singapore, and then Alibaba bought it last year for a couple of billion. So it is one of the really great success stories in that area. But there are a lot of other very good startups which came up in the last 2-3 years in that space, and it's also quite natural to the culture of trading, that this naturally will evolve and is very strong. And besides that, there are many other areas, but I think these are the 3 which are really outstanding, and where we see Singapore really with companies really pacing ahead. An extremely good example is Grab. So basically, this is the company who flattened out Uber in Southeast Asia. Uber lost the battle with them. They sold their business. And now Grab is also one of the first companies who applied for a digital banking licensee, because you can pay with the Grab Pay features in cinemas, in your home order delivery, in a lot of things. So they very quickly went beyond the traditional I book my ride kind of business model, and integrated this with a lot of things, because they have that reach, and they branch out into new areas using that reach for much more than just giving you a ride. And it's extremely successful and very convincing, the way how they do that. Just one example where 2 of those areas also start to merge, interestingly. So now going a bit forward into things that we do in Siemens and Advanta. So if I look a bit more myself about the professional side, I like to call myself as an urbanist and a strategist, civil engineer by training. I looked for 7 years after strategy for Siemens here in the region. 5 years responsible for the city business that Siemens does with Singapore, because it's quite a big, important customer for the company as well. And now since 1 year, I'm heading Siemens Advanta Consulting for Southeast Asia. And 3 years ago, I founded the Digitalization Hub. And specifically about this one, I would like to say a few words and give a few examples to come. Now, Advanta is quite new, basically, the brand, just a half a year old, but the consulting business in Siemens is already more than 25 years old. We specifically now focus on digital consulting, helping companies in their digital journey. Since 1 year now, we also started this business here for that region, and it is what I'm heading now, and it's where I spend most of my time. Before that, I had the idea to found the Digitalization Hub in 2017, and then in July, roughly 3 years ago, I was quite happy because I could start my new job in the morning with "Good morning, Mr. Prime Minister." So we had quite a big launch, and since then, because it was quite public, I was blessed to meet a lot of people. Not only mayors like the one here from Hanoi or from Berlin that you see here on the 5 o'clock position, but a lot of of businesses, a lot of startups, a lot of agencies, planners, policymakers, and talking with those people, sharing our experiences, learning what they're looking for. It was one of the most fruitful times in my entire life. And I really enjoyed it. And I want to share a few things that we did in the hub in the space of urban tech with you going forward. So we had been quite busy actually over the first 2 years. I don't want to go into any of the details, but the work that we did in the hub revolved around smart and connected logistics, about buildings, about machinery, utilities, mobility, and smart cities or estate management. And in that area, it was about how we can use data in terms of analytics, machine learning, computer vision, simulation, making all this more intuitive by using extended reality, and a lot of topics. A few highlights of that that I would like to share is, so we were basically Singapore Digital Hub within Siemens. We were the first hub which really won a very large rail analytics project with the MTR here in Singapore. We were awarded 2 years ago. We will probably work another 2 years on that. It's really big, it's massive. In order to increase the resilience and performance, the reliability of that system. And I will say a few words more of that. Not so specific for Siemens, or quite a bit unusual, but we also actually were the only hub who started to look into smart aqua portfolio, basically looking into fish farms and tanks and see how we can use computer vision and machine learning to improve productivity there. Quite interesting and really fun, and we learned a lot. And frankly speaking, some of those algorithms that we developed there, we could also afterwards use in the space of public transport and self-driving vehicles again. Quite funny. It's good to see how one area can cross-fertilize another one. One of the early things and decisions that I did was to hire artists and gaming experts for my digital analytics hub. I never regretted it. And being in Singapore, where you have basically every gaming studio on the planet being present, so you have a very, very good talent pool of people, designers, gamers, and to transfer that world into an industrial world proved for us to be very interesting and successful. And we really have built up a position in the company with the things that we can do in Singapore here with access. Having access to talent pool, but also to the company startups who are active in that space. And maybe now to go a bit more specific, I will pick 3 examples. One is called REAMS, the Rail Enterprise Asset Management System. So that's a project we currently do with a partner for the subway of Singapore. And it looks into the rolling stock, it looks into all the infrastructure like the signaling system, the communication system, the power supply, the comm systems, and so on, with the aim to improve the availability, with the aim to improve total life cycle costs, because running subway system is really expensive, as you can imagine. You talk millions and millions and millions of dollars. Every year, every month, basically what that cost. So it's a big business. And that tender was one of the most demanding tenders that Siemens was seeing, and it was 2-3 years ago, in the market. And we made our way into that, and we really work into that. And it's very detailed. You have tons of data that you have to deal with, some of them 10 years old, not digitalized at all, but very rich. So how can you mine this? How can you process this natural languages from service reports and so on, and make this basically in a way compatible with your industrial IoT sensor data that you, on the other hand, get out of the equipment and bring this together. So that's one of the things we and my colleagues are working on. Another area is with regards to autonomous driving. So Singapore is one of those places on the planet who takes this very serious. And that, again, out of 2 reasons. First of all, every year, car you don't have on the road is less congestion, is more productivity because people can get faster to work or between meetings and so on. Secondly, being a bus driver in Singapore is not really a favorite career path at all anymore. So more than half of the bus drivers currently in Singapore are not Singaporeans. They are foreigners. They come here for a while, and that, of course, also is of national concern. All the subways are already completely driverless today out of this reason. And so the government, when they talk about self-driving vehicles, they always see this from a public transport point of view. Because what they do not want is a privately owned car circling around the city looking for a car park spot after it dropped off its owner. It's not what a city wants because it adds to congestion. What a city wants is that you take a ride when you need it to the place where you need it at the lowest possible cost for your citizens. And that is what they're driving. So they're coming from a fleet management perspective. And 2 years ago, there was an RFI floated by the government, which basically for 2 areas in Singapore outlined a 7 years program for fixed and scheduled services of robo-buses, as well as mobility on demand in the form of robo-shuttles as a form of public transport, with the fees and tariffs that are today exist for public transport, with the mobility guarantee that public transport today exists. So it's in its ambition really serious. And when the transport minister of Singapore says, I want to have a district, a part of the city ready for this AV deployment in 5 years' time, then it's really a commitment. And now since roughly 1 year, what's called here CFC, the call for collaboration, is kind of a tender basically by the government authority to the private industry, operators, technology providers, OEMs, to come forward with proposals of how this can actually be done. And this goes down not only to showcase the technology, but really showcase this as a solution, where you basically have to meet service levels, where you need to be on time, where everything what is true for normal public transport, they want to also see implemented for robo-shuttles, robo-buses, as the technology improves in the vehicle, so that more and more of those things can be automated. And that's what they're looking into. There's 3 areas which are earmarked to do this. And there's a specific testing facility, what you see on the 6 o'clock portion. It's called CETRAN, the Center of Excellence for Transportation and Research in Autonomous Driving. And through that test facility, every vehicle has to go through to make the level at the tests of level 1, level 2, and so on for autonomous driving before the OEM can apply for a road license with the traffic police. And Siemens partnered with this testing facility. It's run by the universities. We installed a lot of smart infrastructure there to show how, from a city perspective, actually infrastructure can help to solve a lot of problems, which the cars actually today are not able to solve. And to illustrate this a bit, I would like to give one example, more from the technology side, first of all. So we're not using LiDAR or radar, but we use normal cameras to detect what objects are there, because a LiDAR not necessarily sees whether it's a traffic sign or a 3-year-old child, but a camera can identify it and give this information to a car, specifically if the car comes from an area where it doesn't have total view. In order to do this, first of all, you need to, of course, plot what the camera sees on the map grid so that you can give the exact location on that map grid to the car, together with the information that you have from the camera, what actually the object is. And I hope that the video that runs now for me also runs for you. You see that the camera detects the objects. It classifies them as a person or as a car, plots them in the correct spot on the grid, and then these informations are being fused with other information, specifically from LiDAR and so on, so that a more enriched data set can be given to the vehicle, so that, for example, can look around corner, it can anticipate certain things, which otherwise by itself, it only would look into it once it comes into the panic radius. And believe me, you don't want to sit in one of those vehicles if it makes an emergency brake, because even if it runs at 30, an emergency brake is really quite a hard maneuver. And this is what you don't want to have in a public bus, for example. So that's one example. Now, to explain this to a politician, frankly speaking, is not easy. So in order to facilitate this a bit, we built a little app in order to show also how can what are the use cases, what are things where infrastructure can actually help. And I hope, again, this runs for you as well. So one of those things is, for example, you really help the car by looking around the corner and tell it, okay, there might be a danger, please slow down, specifically in areas where it's not in direct sight. So that was the first use case. The next use case, and I think that's something which already has been tried, this kind of valet parking is a good business case. The vehicle drops the passenger somewhere and then goes off the road to a place where it can be safely parked. One of the most complicated things in autonomous driving is what if there is an obstruction on the road? Because typically machines would not cross the lines of a lane because it's against the rule, right? So this is something where you can, as infrastructure, advise the car what to do and how to proceed. In the same way, you can help a vehicle to anticipate certain things, because if you detect little objects which are 1 meter high and behave erratically, most likely these are kids, and maybe you want to tell the car that this is something and should be slowed down. And you can do this from different perspectives, and that helps also in terms of planning of how do I set up my roads in the future, how do I do, for example, platooning of those vehicles. That's also from a business perspective interesting case. And these are some of the examples and the areas that we work in Singapore. This showcase, for example, we developed together with a local startup here, which did the 3D rendering and some of the animations for us here. And I think that's really cool. That's something which will, over the next 10 years, really change life of people. It will make it easier. So, for example, if you imagine your grandma have to go to the doctor, and it can just use and take a robo shuttle. It doesn't have to pay €100 to get a taxi for there. That really, I think, is something meaningful. And this is where technology in form of the right solution really can help to improve life in a city. One very last example, the final one that I have for you, is very low tech, basically, in a very different city. That is old time of Hanoi. And what you see here, as you can see, doesn't look like what you would see in Berlin, maybe unter den Linden, right? So there is no traffic lights, there are no lanes, but interestingly, it still flows, it works. But the traffic behavior is completely different in these environments. And that could be India, that could be this Vietnam, it could be India, it could be Colombia, maybe, it could be Indonesia. That's rather the normal case, how traffic looks like. People make use of the space they have in any mode. Now, that's quite a challenge for traditional traffic management systems. Because what you would find in Berlin, you have those induction loops in the lanes, and they measure traffic, and then based on this one, ample lights are being steered and time periods are being given. Well, if you don't have lanes, this technology completely doesn't work. Traffic cameras don't work. So here again, we used that was a use case we did together with the city of Hanoi after the mayor visited me in the hub. We started this pilot, and we used standard surveillance cameras that they had installed in the city to detect the traffic on intersections and feed this back to the traffic management system, so that actually dynamically adaptive, those signal schedules can be adapted, and with the aim to basically smooth down traffic on intersections depending on what actually demand and the flow is in the morning versus the evening and so on. And there we could use actually some of the work that we also did for the fish farm, interestingly, because it's about object detection, sizing it, placing it at a certain location, and quite interesting. So this is now running as a pilot in Hanoi, and the Hanoi Parliament currently is working in the process to run this for the first 500 intersections and then eventually, hopefully, for the whole city. So that is, in a nutshell, some of the examples that we have done here in Singapore. With this, I would like to unshare my screen. And now you see me fully and completely again. And I just see that we more or less over time. But if there are questions, I'm very happy to answer them.
Very interesting talk, Steffen. Thanks a lot from the really nice and interesting view from urban tech in Singapore. And I was also very happy to see one of my products on your slide, so that was also good. We already have 2 questions in the chat. I will read them out loud for you, Steffen. The first one is talking about Singapore as a highly connected city. What would be the most important thing Berlin or Europe needs to learn from Singapore?
Oh, that was a similar question that the previous mayor of Berlin also asked me when he visited us last year. I think one of the things one can learn is really this kind of comprehensive look at topics, not coming from a kind of dogmatic portion, but rather looks very pragmatic at topics, looking at them wholesomely, always focusing on what does it need to get it done. Not only to start it, but really to get it done and get it accepted by the people and having it integrated in the other things that you have in your cities, like your planning procedures, for example, your approval procedures. And I think that's one of the really powerful things that we see in Singapore.
Okay.
And it's the soft portion of the thing, but it's the very hard portion of the thing, because typically in a political environment, it's much easier said than it's done.
That's true. Okay, so the second question is, are there any places in Europe that can be compared to Singapore regarding process and urban tech, digitalization and mobility?
No, I would say Singapore, on the one hand, of course, is also a bit specific, because if you're on an island, you can manage certain parts of your infrastructure much easier than if you are connected to a large landmass around it. Like, for example, there's one onboard unit in Singapore. Everybody has it. Every car is equipped with it. You use it to pay your car parks, but you also use it to pay your toll. And since you have this infrastructure for every car in the island installed, a lot of things are, of course, much easier. Well, you don't have to deal with other countries' cars coming in and then see to solve it. So that's something which you will, of course, not be able to replicate in Europe. But I think specifically when it comes to readiness for autonomous driving, I think the Netherlands, in terms of their regulation, in their openness and also public backing from the society, is quite similar. I think in terms of comprehensive planning, enable non-motorized forms of transport. I think Helsinki or Copenhagen are cities which Singapore also looks into and see what can they learn from that. How to improve convenience for people which are basically not in a car or on a bike. So this, I think, is quite interesting. Typically, I would say we have cities in Europe which in some areas are certainly more advanced than Singapore, but in other areas Singapore is really strong because it's so wholesome, so comprehensive. There's not a single thing where they really significantly lag, and that as a whole, as a package, I think makes the country or the city so interesting.
Okay, thanks a lot.